I saved a child's life and became a villain in the eyes of their parents. I was walking home from work when I heard yelling above me, followed by the sight of a baby falling out of a window 5 stories high. It hurled through the air, and my brain didn't even think. My body just reacted as I dropped my suitcase and held my arms out to catch the baby as close to my chest as possible. It landed in my arms and I curled into it, doing everything to ensure it suffered as little impact as possible. I dropped to my knees, too scared to check on it but praying it was alive. After seconds that felt like hours, I heard the baby's weak crying. It was alive. The parents, a couple in their late 40s, came running out of the building. They were sobbing, grabbing the baby from my arms. Thank you, you saved our baby, the father kept repeating. The mother hugged me, tears streaming down her face. An ambulance arrived and took the baby to the hospital. The parents called me a hero. I went home feeling anxious but proud of myself. 1 week later, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find a woman in a suit handing me an envelope. I ripped it open, thinking maybe the parents sent a thank you letter. Instead, I saw lawsuit papers. Apparently, the impact from me catching the child broke both her arms and legs. She was alive but in critical condition, and the parents were now suing me for $2 million. Criminal child endangerment and reckless rescue attempt. If I lost, I was looking at 5 to 10 years in prison. I read the page 3 times before it sank in. I called the parents 15 times but got no answer. I drove to their apartment. The mother opened the door and her face went red. "You broke our baby!" She physically pushed me. "Get away from us before we call the police." She slammed the door in my face. The next morning, I went to my assigned public defender, Ms. Ramsey. She was juggling 40 cases and barely had time to look at mine. "This doesn't look good," she said. "Technically, you did cause the injuries. The law doesn't care about intentions. Just take the plea deal. 2 years is better than 10. I looked at her, dumbfounded. The preliminary hearing 3 weeks later was a nightmare. The prosecutor stood up with photos of the baby's x-rays. The defendant's reckless actions directly caused these fractures. The parents testified, crying about their traumatized baby. Several witnesses said they saw me drop the baby. I don't know if they were hired or where they came from, because there was nobody around when it happened. I walked out in disbelief that this was actually happening. The day before the final trial, Mrs. Ramsey called with a new plea deal. 3 years. Take it. If we go to trial and lose, you're looking at 10. I saved that baby's life. I'm not pleading guilty. That night, I broke down in my apartment. The next day, the courtroom was packed. The parents sat in the front row looking like grieving victims. The prosecutor's opening destroyed me while Ms. Ramsey's was weak and unprepared. I could see it in the judge's eyes. He'd already made up his mind. The prosecution spent 2 days presenting their case. Expert witnesses, medical testimony, the parents crying on the stand. It was over. I was going to prison for catching a falling baby. At the end of the trial, the prosecutor stood up. "Does the defense have any witnesses?" "No, Your Honor," Ms. Ramsey replied. The judge looked at her. "Does the defense have anything else?" Ms. Ramsey said no. The judge was about to bang his gavel when the courtroom doors burst open. A young man limped in on crutches, his leg in a cast. The parents' faces went ghost white. "Who are you?" the judge asked. "Bobby Rodriguez, their former foster son." He pointed at the parents. "I lived with these people. I know exactly what they do, and I can prove what really happened that day." Bobby limped forward and handed the judge a thick folder. The judge opened it and started reading. His face changed from annoyed to shocked to furious in seconds. "Bailiff, lock those doors. Nobody leaves." He set the folder down and looked at Bobby. "Start from the beginning, under oath." The bailiff swore Bobby in, and he gripped the rail to keep himself steady on the crutches. "They take in foster kids," he said, "not to raise them, to use them. They wait for an accident, except the accident isn't an accident. They cause it. Then they sue whoever they can pin it on, and they settle out of court, and they keep the money." The courtroom got quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear people breathing. Bobby explained that Augusto and Dakota took him in when he was 11. He was just a kid with nowhere else to go, and they seemed nice at first. They gave him a room, fed him dinner, told him he was part of the family, but within a year, everything changed. Bobby said they staged an accident where he fell down a staircase in their building. They sued the landlord, claiming the stairs were unsafe and that nobody maintained the property. Bobby's voice got harder and he pointed at Augusto. "I didn't fall. He pushed me. I broke my hip. I was 12. They settled for $150,000. I felt like all the air left my lungs. They broke a 12-year-old kid for money." Augusto didn't move. He just sat there with a look on his face like Bobby was telling some boring story that had nothing to do with him. Dakota kept her eyes on the table, picking at the edge of a tissue. The judge tapped the folder. "And these documents?" Bobby nodded. He explained that after what happened to him, he never stopped watching them. He knew where they lived, knew when they moved, knew when they took in new kids. When he saw the news about the lawsuit and recognized their names, he knew. He spent weeks pulling public court records, and what he handed the judge was the proof. He said the folder held 3 prior lawsuits filed by Augusto and Dakota over the past 10 years. Each one involved some kind of accident with a child in their care. One foster child supposedly fell off a porch and broke his collarbone. Another burned themselves on a stove and needed skin grafts. Each time they filed a lawsuit. Each time they blamed someone else, the property owner, a neighbor, a daycare, and each time the case settled out of court, meaning they got paid and nobody looked too close at what really happened. He said 2 of those kids had aged out of the system and vanished, and nobody had ever followed up on a single one of them. The lawsuits had been spread across different courts and different lawyers on purpose, so no one would ever connect them into a pattern. It had taken him weeks of digging just to find them all and lay them side by side. Bobby looked at the judge and said, "They collect kids like other people collect paychecks." That sentence hit me so hard I almost couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so bad I had to put them in my lap, but I don't think anyone was looking at me anymore. Everyone was looking at Bobby or at the parents. I turned and looked at Augusto and Dakota. Dakota was leaning into Augusto, whispering something fast and angry, her eyes darting around the room like she was looking for an exit. Augusto had a smile stuck on his face, but it was wrong, tight and stiff, like someone had glued it there. His eyes were completely cold. No sadness, no guilt, no fear, just calculation. And neither of them was crying anymore. Through the whole trial, at least one of them had been crying every single day. Dakota with her tissues, Augusto wiping his eyes during testimony. The tears had been constant, like a faucet they could turn on whenever they needed it. But now there wasn't a single tear between them, and that's when I really saw them. Not as grieving parents. 2 people people running numbers in their heads, trying to figure out how to get out of this. 2 people who had done this before, who had built their whole life around hurting people and getting paid for it. I was just the latest target. That baby was just the latest tool. What else was in that folder made me realize there was more these people wanted than just money. Full story on channel linked below. The prosecutor must have been feeling it too, because he suddenly stood up. His face had lost some color, like someone who just realized he'd been building a case on a lie. "Your Honor," he said, and his voice cracked. "The prosecution requests a brief recess to review this new evidence before proceeding." The judge didn't even think about it. He looked at the prosecutor with an expression somewhere between angry and disgusted. "No, we're going to see everything in that folder today. Sit down." The prosecutor opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just sat. I sat there shaking at the defense table, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something other than fear. I felt angry, not just for me, but for Bobby, for that baby, for every kid those 2 people had ever used and thrown away like they were nothing. Then Bobby reached back into the folder and pulled out another set of papers, printed screenshots of text messages. He held them up. "About 6 months ago, Dakota reached out to me, said she wanted to reconnect, be family again. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly wanted me at their table. I knew something was off, but I went because I wanted to know what they were planning. While I was there, I photographed the messages on her phone." He looked at the judge. "These are between Augusto and Dakota, sent 1 week before they dropped their baby out of that window. May I read them?" The judge nodded. Bobby read the first one. It was from Dakota. "She walks under the building every day at 5:15, like clockwork. We just need the baby to land in her arms. If she misses, we call 911 and say it was an accident." My whole body went cold. That was me. They had been watching me. They knew my schedule, knew what time I walked under their window every day after work, and they had planned the whole thing around it. I wasn't some random person who happened to be there. I was chosen. I kept thinking about all the ordinary mornings I'd walk that same stretch of sidewalk without ever once looking up. To them, I had never been a person at all. I'd been a variable in a plan, a pair of arms that happened to pass under their window at exactly the right time. Bobby kept reading. The next one was from Augusto. "Hold her face up over the ledge so it looks natural, like she climbed out of the crib and fell." Then another from Dakota. "And if the baby dies?" Bobby paused. Then he read Augusto's reply. "Then we sue for more." Nobody said a word. I have never heard silence like that. It had weight to it, like it was pressing down on everyone in the room. Then a woman somewhere behind me started crying. This soft, broken sound that cut through the silence like a knife. I think that's when it really hit everyone. This wasn't some legal trick or misunderstanding. These people had sat in their apartment and typed out messages about whether their own baby might die, and their answer was that death just meant a bigger payout. The judge slowly turned toward Augusto and Dakota. His face was hard, like stone. He spoke to the bailiff first. "I want you to take custody of this entire evidence folder. Every document, every page, secure it." The bailiff carried the folder to a table near the back and stood beside it like he was guarding it. Then the judge folded his hands and leaned forward, and when he spoke, every word had weight behind it. "I'm going to give you one opportunity to explain these documents and these messages," he said. "Choose your words very carefully." Augusto stood up. I'll give him credit for one thing. Even now, with everything falling apart, he stood up straight, buttoned his jacket, and looked the judge right in the face. His voice was calm and steady, like he'd rehearsed this exact speech. "Your Honor, this boy has a vendetta against us. He was a troubled foster child with serious behavioral problems. We tried our best to give him a good home, and he resented us for the structure we provided. He's fabricated all of this. The texts, the documents, he typed them himself. It's all revenge." He said it so smoothly that for half a second I almost believed him. That's how good he was. Dakota sat beside him, nodding along, dabbing her eyes with a fresh tissue like she was the victim. I looked at the judge. He was watching Augusto with an expression I couldn't read at first. Then I realized what it was. Not confusion, not consideration. It was patience. The kind of patience a person has when they already know the truth and they're just waiting for the other person to finish digging their own grave. But Bobby didn't flinch. He stood there on his crutches, steady as anything, and waited for Augusto to finish. Then he said, "Okay, then explain the messages, Augusto." They came off Dakota's phone, her number, your number, time-stamped a week before the fall. "Explain the part where you wrote 'hold her face up over the ledge so it looks natural.' Explain why your wife asked what happens if the baby dies, and you answered then, 'we sue for more.' Those are your words, from your conversation with her." Augusto's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Bobby turned to Dakota. "And explain why you asked that question at all, about your own daughter." That's when Dakota broke. She jumped to her feet so fast her chair scraped the floor with a screech that made half the gallery flinch. Her face was red and twisted, and all that fake sadness was gone. What was underneath was pure rage. "You were always an ungrateful little liar," she screamed at Bobby. "We fed you, we clothed you, and you repay us like this?" The judge slammed his gavel. "Order, sit down now." But it was too late. Augusto had just told the judge that Bobby was basically a stranger, a troubled kid with a grudge who made everything up. But Dakota's outburst proved the exact opposite. She didn't scream at Bobby like he was a stranger. She screamed at him like she had raised him, like someone who had fed him dinner and washed his clothes, which is exactly what Bobby said she did. She knew him, and every single person in that courtroom could see it. Augusto knew it too. I watched his hand shoot out and grab Dakota's arm, hard, pulling her toward him. "Sit down and shut up," he said through his teeth. He tried to keep his voice low, but not low enough. People in the first rows turned to look at each other with wide eyes. They heard it too. Dakota sat down, her whole body shaking, the tissue in her hand torn to pieces. Augusto straightened his tie, trying to act like nothing had happened, but the mask was gone. Everyone had seen exactly who these people were. That's when Ms. Ramsey, who had barely said 10 words during the entire trial, who had told me to plead guilty, finally leaned close. "I think we're going to be okay," she whispered. I looked at her. I really looked at her. "You told me to plead guilty," I said. I didn't whisper it. I didn't shout it. I just said it, plain and simple, because that's what it was. Ms. Ramsey opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't have an answer. She looked down at her hands, at nothing. I didn't look at her again. I didn't need her anymore. The truth is, I never did. The only reason I was sitting there as a free woman instead of rotting in a cell with a guilty plea on my record was that I had refused to listen to her. Every piece of advice she gave me would have buried me. The only thing that saved me was a young man on crutches who had the courage to walk through those doors and tell the truth. The The judge asked the bailiff to read the message thread aloud one more time, slowly, into the record. The same words, the same cold plan, the same line about a bigger payout. But this time everyone already knew what was coming, so people weren't listening for the shock of it. They were listening for the details. And as I sat there hearing it again, something I'd buried came back to me. When I caught that baby, she hadn't been wrapped the way you wrap a baby to keep it warm and safe. The blanket was loose, barely around her, more like something thrown over a package than a child. At the time, I was too panicked to think about it. Now I understood. They had wrapped her loose on purpose, so she'd come free easy when she fell, so it would look like a baby who had wriggled out of a crib and tumbled out a window. They had planned even that. The reading ended and the room went still. Nobody moved. I could hear someone behind me breathing in short, shaky breaths, like they were trying not to be sick, and something inside me just clicked. For months, I had been sitting in chairs, sitting in courtrooms, sitting in my apartment, just sitting and waiting and hoping someone would believe me. And now the truth was out, right there in the open for everyone to hear. I didn't want to sit anymore. I stood up. Nobody asked me to. The judge didn't call on me. I just stood up from the defense table, my legs shaking, and I stayed standing. The whole courtroom looked at me. My voice shook when I started, but I got the words out clear enough for everyone to hear. I caught your baby because I thought she was in danger, I said, looking straight at both of them. She was in danger, but the danger wasn't the fall. The danger was you. I turned to Augusto. For the first time, that smooth, controlled expression was cracking, and I could see something behind his eyes that might have been fear. You dropped your own child out of a window to make money, and then you tried to send me to prison for saving her life. Then I looked at Dakota. She had her head down, but her eyes were looking up at me through her hair, and there was something wild in them, something trapped. You hugged me, I said. You stood outside that building and you cried on my shoulder and you thanked me for saving your baby. And the whole time, you were planning to destroy me. I sat back down. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Nobody clapped. Nobody shouted. It was just silence, the real kind, the kind that happens when a room full of people all understand the same thing at the same time. Then Augusto made his last move. He must have known it was over, but he couldn't stop. He turned away from the judge and faced the gallery. "This is a setup," he said, almost shouting now. "That boy stole my wife's phone. He went through her private messages without permission. None of this is admissible. This is harassment." His voice had lost that smooth quality. It was raw and desperate, and he was looking at the people in the gallery like if he could just get one person to nod along, he could still win. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam his gavel. He just spoke, and something about the cold, flat way he said it was scarier than any shout. "I'll determine what's admissible, Mr. Akins, and right now, I'm far more concerned about the safety of that baby than I am about your legal objections." He looked at the bailiff. "Contact Child Protective Services, immediately." Then he picked up a single sheet of paper and read slowly, like he wanted every person in that room to remember it. The defendant acted with extraordinary courage under impossible circumstances. The injuries sustained by the child were the direct and sole result of the deliberate actions of the child's own parents. This court finds the defendant not guilty on all counts. Somewhere in the gallery, a few people let out a breath at the same time, like the whole room had been holding it for 2 days and finally got permission to stop. I didn't move. I didn't stand up. I didn't cry. I didn't do any of the things you think you'd do in that moment. I just sat there with my hands in my lap and breathed, in and out, like my body had forgotten how to do anything else. I looked up and Bobby was still standing at the front, and he caught my eye and gave me a small nod. Just a little dip of his chin, nothing big, but it said everything. Then the judge turned to Augusto and Dakota, and his voice got harder, colder, like metal. "Based on the evidence presented today, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation. The charges I am recommending include child endangerment, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted perjury." Dakota started crying again, but it was different this time. No show in it. This was ugly, messy crying. The kind that comes from deep in your chest when you finally understand the game is over, and you lost. Augusto grabbed her hand and stood up fast, pulling her toward the aisle like he was going to walk out like nothing happened. The bailiff stepped in front of them. The judge said nobody leaves. Augusto stopped. For a second he looked like he might push past, but he didn't. He just stood there holding Dakota's hand, frozen, with nowhere to go. Bobby moved through the noise until he was standing next to the defense table. "I'm sorry I didn't come forward sooner," he said softly. "It took me weeks to get the records, and weeks more to get the courage." I looked at his crutches, at the cast, at the way he held his weight to one side like standing was something he had to think about every second. "How did you get hurt this time?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't. This is from when I was 12. It never set right because they wouldn't take me to a follow-up appointment. The settlement money was supposed to pay for my surgery." He paused. "They kept every cent. I didn't have words for that. I just looked at him and he looked at me, and we both understood something without saying it." The judge ordered Augusto and Dakota held in custody pending the investigation. As they passed the defense table, Augusto slowed. He turned his head and looked right at me, his eyes small and mean, and said in a voice low enough that only I could hear, "You think you won? This isn't over." I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I didn't feel scared of him anymore. "Yeah," I said. "It is." The bailiff pulled him forward. Dakota walked behind him with her head down, that torn tissue still crumpled in her fist. Bobby limped out with me. Outside, I sat on a bench near the courthouse steps, and he sat next to me, setting his crutches against the armrest. For a while, neither of us said anything. Finally, I asked, "What happens to the baby?" Bobby looked out at the street. "Child Protective Services will place her somewhere safe, somewhere better." I nodded. I thought about the weight of that baby in my arms, the sound of her weak crying, the relief when I knew she was alive. I would catch her again. I knew that much. A pigeon landed near my shoe, pecked at the concrete, and flew off. The light changed. Cars moved through the intersection. I picked up my bag and walked under the building.